Hey everyone, this is our first part of our review for our second quiz in the Module 3. We're talking about function compositions. First, in this video, we'll talk about it from tables. There's a practice problem. Then next, we'll talk about it from equations. So first, let's remind ourselves what a composition is. When I think of compositions, I think of one thing we talked about is typically it's like do one function or follow the instructions for one function, then another. And we've talked about how some are undefined, sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. But let's start and see what this is asking us to do. It says let C be the function that assigns an amount of coffee, the number of the milligrams of caffeine in that coffee. Okay, so some of these, they word differently. This one says assigns the amount of coffee, so that's going to be taking in a coffee, and it gives us the amount of caffeine in that coffee. So let's look at that in our table here. Here's my coffee in liters, and then it's going to output the amount of caffeine in that amount of coffee. And then we have another function, I'm going to do it in blue. It gives the amount of coffee based on how many hours slept. Okay, so that one, it's going to output coffee here, and it takes in S, the number of hours slept. Okay? It says, use the tables above to find C of M of 6 and interpret its meaning in terms of the situation given. So whenever I see a composition or a composite function like this, looking at this right here, I always want to think about what each input and output will be. So I know that 6 is my input, and it's being put into M. So let me think about what these things are going to be. So M, here's my M. It only takes in time in hours. So this is going to be 6 hours. This is a time. So I have a function that's taking in a time, 6 hours of time. And if that goes into M, I know it's going to give me out, it's going to give me out some liters of coffee. That's what's coming out of M. Then I see it's going into this C function. M of 6 is going into the C function. It's going to give me, and C, so it takes in liters coffee, yes, sure enough, and it's going to give me caffeine. So I made a quick diagram out of what these things, these inputs and outputs are going to be. This will both help us find the value and help us interpret its meaning. So let's start by finding the value. So if I put in 6 hours into M, that's going to give me, let's go find it. Here's 6 hours. It's going to give me 0.7. And then if I do C of 0.7, I'll put that 0.7 into my, put it over here. So that's my liters of coffee. If I put that into C, my red function, it's going to give me out 284. 284.2, because it's 0.7 in, 284.2 out. Alright, so then overall, I can give this value and interpret what it means. So I'm going to label the units here, milligrams, caffeine. Oops, that backwards. So interpret its meaning. So to interpret it, we need to know the input and the output. So I'm just going to put this in a sentence. I know my input was 6 hours, and that was the time slept. So after sleeping 6 hours, Mr. Waite, Mr. Waite buys, will drink 284.2 milligrams of caffeine. Cool. So the next one, so that pretty much covers it. When I say interpret, we're talking about inputs. So 6 hours was an input, and our output and we're just saying what those things are in this overall composite function. This also gives a function q. I'm going to put a function q and give it an input and output here. I'm going to do it in green, actually. So a function q tells the number of hours of sleep based on the number of quizzes he graded the day before. So again, when I'm looking for inputs and outputs, so it tells the number of hours of sleep. So that's going to be my output, because it's my output, hours of sleep. And I know my input, let's see, based on number of quizzes. So number quizzes. It says write a composition using function notation that gives the milligrams of caffeine based on the number of quizzes. So when I'm writing compositions, I again really like to diagram these things. I know my output at the very, very end of all this needs to be, it says, gives milligrams caffeine. Milligrams caffeine. That's got to be my output at the very end. I also know what my input's got to be, if I look in here, based on the number of quizzes. So my input's got to be number of quizzes. So then when I'm composing functions, I just have to find the steps to take me all the way from number of quizzes all the way back to milligrams of caffeine, and just write them in the appropriate order. So first, I see number of quizzes. I'm looking for a function that takes in that. I only know q is a function that can take that in. So q would be my first step, and it's going to give me out, q gives me hours slept. Okay, so that'll give me an hours slept. And then now I'm at hour step. I'm trying to get closer to milligrams of caffeine. I look up, I'm thinking what functions take in hours? Well, only the blue one, m. My m takes in hours slept, and it's going to give me out liters of coffee. Then I think to myself, what function takes in liters of coffee and gives out caffeine? Ah, well, C does. That's the last one. What takes in coffee and gives us caffeine. Okay, so we're pretty much ready to write our composition. We know which functions take us. All we have to do is give ourselves an input. So let's say little q equals number of quizzes. Now I just take these letters and these functions and put them in order. So q is my input. The first function I applied to it was big Q. It takes in and gives me hours slept. The next function I applied was big M. It gave me the meters of coffee. And then the last function I applied was C. And I know overall that's going to give me caffeine at the very end. So there's a lot of colors here, but what's really important is that we made the map, and then we just picked the functions in order. So first I had to use Q, then I had to use M, then I had to use C, and that's how we write that in order. Remember, there's another notation for this. You could write C of, M of, with these open circles, Q, and then that's of our little q, our input. Great. So that pretty much covers what we need to be able to do with tables. First of all, finding the values, so picking them out in order, and then secondly, interpreting, and then lastly, being able to write longer compositions as needed. So try out these two practice problems and then check the solutions to them once you're ready on the button right below this video.